Close your eyes for a second. You're a monk in 9th century China, standing over a stone bowl by candlelight. You're not a soldier. You're not a blacksmith. You're looking for the elixir of life, the formula that stops death itself. You grind sulfur, charcoal, and a strange white mineral called saltpeter into the bowl, the way you have 100 times before. Except this time, the mixture catches. Not a flicker, a flash. The bowl is gone, your eyebrows are gone, and the wall behind you is scorched black. You just failed to find immortality. What you actually found was the opposite, a way to end life faster than anything humans had ever built before. So the real question isn't why guns are dangerous. Everyone already knows that. The real question is how a mixture invented by people trying to live forever became, within a few hundred years, the thing that ended the age of knights, the age of castles, and an entire military order that had lasted 1,000 years. The answer starts with a Chinese text called the Zhenyuan Miao Dao Yao Lue, believed to date to the 9th century. It's an alchemy manual, and buried in it is a warning that reads almost like a lab safety notice. It says that when sulfur, saltpeter, and honey were heated together, the mixture had already burned the hands and faces of several alchemists, and in at least one case, burned down the entire house they were working in. That sentence is one of the oldest surviving written records of gunpowder on Earth. And notice what it's not. It's not a battle plan. It's not a weapon. It's a warning label written by people who were trying to invent medicine and instead invented fire that water couldn't put out. Here's the thing almost nobody thinks about. Discovering an explosive substance and turning it into a weapon are two completely different inventions, separated by centuries. For the first 100 years or so after gunpowder appeared, the Chinese mostly used it the way we still use explosives at celebrations. Fireworks, loud noise to scare off evil spirits during festivals. Nobody had connected the dots yet between something that explodes and something that could kill a person on purpose. Then somebody did connect those dots, and once they did, there was no going back. By the 10th century, Chinese armies were strapping tubes of gunpowder to arrows, creating what historians now call fire arrows. Simple, terrifying if you'd never seen one. But still, just fire delivered farther than a torch could throw it. The real shift happened a little later, when soldiers packed gunpowder directly into bamboo tubes and pointed the open end at an enemy. Light the tube. Flame and sparks shoot out the front. This was called a fire lance, and it is, genetically speaking, the direct ancestor of every gun that has ever existed. But fire lances had a problem. Fire alone doesn't kill a man in armor particularly efficiently. So soldiers started packing something else into the barrel, along with the powder. Pebbles, scrap iron, broken pottery, anything hard enough to travel with the blast. And that's the moment, sometime in the 12th century, when the weapon stopped being about the fire and started being about the object flying out in front of it. Some of the earliest accounts describe Song Dynasty soldiers using fire lances that specifically launched projectiles at attacking troops in battles like the 1132 Siege of Dayan. That's not a flamethrower anymore. That's a gun in its most primitive possible form, which raises an uncomfortable question. If the projectile was the real weapon all along, why did it take humans another few hundred years to build something that actually looked like a gun? The answer is bamboo. It splits. It burns through. It can't hold enough pressure to launch something with real force. What gunpowder needed wasn't a better formula. It needed a stronger tube. And the people who figured that out weren't in China anymore. Gunpowder technology moved west along trade routes, and the group most responsible for carrying it across an entire continent wasn't merchants. It was the Mongol Empire, using early gunpowder weapons in sieges as their armies swept from East Asia into the Middle East and Eastern Europe during the 13th century. By the time gunpowder reached European hands, it landed among people with a very different set of skills than Chinese alchemists. Centuries of experience casting bronze for church bells, metal workers who already knew how to build something that could survive enormous internal pressure without shattering. So Europeans did something almost obvious in hindsight. They stopped using bamboo and started casting the barrel out of metal. Here's where it gets brutal. For 1,000 years, a stone wall meant safety. 10 feet of solid rock could hold off an army armed with ladders and swords, more or less indefinitely. That single fact shaped how empires were built, how cities were designed, how wars were fought. Then, in 1453, Ottoman forces laid siege to Constantinople, a city whose walls had turned back invaders for over 1,000 years, using massive cast bronze cannons built specifically to break those walls apart. And they did. Constantinople fell, not because its defenders were weak, but because the entire concept of a wall as ultimate protection had just become obsolete overnight. And that same shift didn't just end the age of castles. It ended the logic that had made knights the most powerful soldiers on any battlefield for centuries. A knight spent his entire life training with a sword, on a horse, in armor built to stop a blade. None of that training mattered against a soldier holding a metal tube who had learned to use it in an afternoon. For the first time in human history, killing power didn't require a lifetime of training. It required a trigger, and that terrified the people who had spent generations at the top of a system built entirely around skill. Once that idea existed, the only direction left was smaller. Engineers spent the next 3 centuries shrinking the cannon into something a single person could carry, the hand cannon, then the matchlock, which used a slow-burning cord to ignite the powder automatically, then the flintlock in the 1600s, which struck flint against steel to create a spark with a simple pull of a trigger, no burning cord required. By the early 1800s, a Scottish minister named Alexander Forsyth patented something even faster, a small percussion cap that ignited with a sharp strike instead of a spark, which made firing a weapon reliable in the rain for the first time in history. Not long after, gunsmiths sealed bullet, powder, and primer together into a single metal cartridge. Loading a weapon that used to take a soldier close to a minute now took less than 5 seconds. And once loading became fast, one final invention removed the human limit entirely. In 1884, an American inventor named Hiram Maxim built a gun that used the force of its own recoil to reload and fire automatically, over and over, as long as the trigger stayed pulled. For 1,000 years, armies had lined soldiers up shoulder to shoulder because that was the only way to keep a battlefield covered in projectiles. The Maxim gun made that entire strategy pointless. One weapon, one operator, hundreds of rounds a minute. European armies would still march in open formation into machine gun fire during the opening years of the First World War, because military tactics simply hadn't caught up yet to what a single gun could now do to an entire advancing line. Here's the part that's easy to miss underneath all of it. Every gun that exists today, from a hunting rifle in a cabinet to a sidearm in a museum case, traces back through that exact chain. Hand cannon, cannon, fire lance, fire arrow, all the way to a monk's bowl catching fire by accident in 9th century China. He wasn't trying to invent a weapon, he was trying to cheat death. Instead, he built one of the most efficient tools for causing it that our species has ever produced. Same discovery, same basic chemistry, a completely different purpose than the one it started with. And that's really the pattern behind almost every dangerous technology we've ever built. It rarely starts as a weapon. It starts as someone chasing something else entirely, and the danger shows up later, almost by accident. If you want more stories like this, where history's biggest turning points started as something else completely, subscribe, because that's exactly what this channel is for.